Hey everyone, welcome to Earth in Time, a channel that explores human as well as Earth history, and especially places where the two intersect. Today I'm in Hemet, California, in Southern California, not too far from the greater LA area, and I'm visiting the Western Science Museum where they made some amazing discoveries here in what they call the Valley of the Mastodons. They were building a reservoir here, and in the course of building that reservoir, they found hundreds and thousands of fossils here that helped explain what life was like back here in the last glacial maxima over 10,000 years ago. So come join me today. Let's explore this amazing museum. I'm super excited to be here with you. It's my first time here as well, so we can learn together. Let's get to it. All right, so as we start heading into the museum, it says Life on Earth, and it actually walks through each of the geologic time periods from the Precambrian, which you can see a little jellyfish up there, and some kind of seaweed, to the Cambrian, and it gives you the dates on them, to the Ordovician, the Silurian. So all of these are times before the time of dinosaurs and some very early life forms. There's one of my favorites, the Eurypterid or sea scorpion. And we come under here and we get to the Devonian, which is the age of the fishes. You'll see they have a shark up there. We get to the Carboniferous, when plants and bugs and amphibians were becoming more prevalent. And look, it's a Dimetrodon, not a dinosaur, but really cool ancient animal. We get to the Triassic, so now we're in the time of the dinosaurs. And the Jurassic, everybody's familiar with that. Those are ammonites up there. And then, of course, here's the Cretaceous, and the king of the Cretaceous is the T-Rex. And they have a T-Rex up there, and we keep going. There's a Tertiary, and we can see a horse. Really cool, so let's check out this museum. Now, as I come in here, I'll mention that it was $10 to come in, and I've got to say, this is a beautiful center. Look at this. They start off the museum here with talking about geologic time. As geologists, one of the things we have to think about most is when are we? Not only recognize the three-dimensionality of the world around us, also have to know when in time those rocks were being deposited and what was happening during that time. And this is a great display what California looked like through different geologic time periods. And what they've done is they've just shown what it looked like from the Precambrian, so you're talking over 500 million years ago, which I know is hard to fathom. This area of California, there's not a whole lot going on. Basically, it was an ocean in this area for a really long period of time. Here's the Devonian. This is known as the Age of Fishes. Things get a lot more interesting in the Carboniferous. The Carboniferous is named because this is when there was a lot of coal being developed. So a lot of the coal mines out in the eastern United States are from the Carboniferous. And this was a time when you started having large insects and plants, and it's all those plants breaking down that create coal, and the coal we use pretty much every day. Following that time, we'll see there are some islands starting to come in here in Southern California, and really heading towards the Utah area is where we can pick up a lot of what's known as the Permian. So this is the time just before the dinosaurs, and you'll see one of my favorite creatures, the Dimetrodon or sailfins, and now we can get in the Triassic. So this is the early time of the dinosaurs. And it says that you can push a slider. Oh, okay. So you can move this map. I'm just figuring this out for y'all. So during the Triassic, we can see where we were here. And you'll see there is some land off to the east of us, but we're still really in the ocean. In the Jurassic, I learned I can slide these over. Whoop. In the Jurassic, we're starting to pick up some more island arcs coming in here. And you'll see there's something called the Nevada orogeny. Orogeny just means a mountain building event. So you had a bunch of these island arcs slamming into the western part of the United States, creating a bunch of mountains, including this is the time period when you're starting to build the Sierra Nevada mountains, but they're really deep down. And then we get to the Cretaceous. And the Cretaceous, of course, is famous for our friend up there, the T-Rex. That's probably the most famous of the creatures that most people know about. And you'll see here, we're actually in what would have been a bay during that time. So there would have been dinosaurs out here roaming around. There would have been, plesiosaurs and other kinds of reptilian-like sea creatures swimming around, as well as things like ammonites. And then we come to the time after the extinction of the dinosaurs. We start getting into the age of birds and the age of mammals. So we went from the age of dinosaurs in the Mesozoic to this time. And you'll actually see that there's actually some islands here. And then we come to today, to the Quaternary. So that's 1.8 million years ago to the present. And there are lots of creatures roaming around here. So this is kind of what California still looks like today, right? And we're down here. along the San Andreas Fault Zone in here. And what you can see is that there's a lot of land here. And of course, during the last glacial maxima, this area was a lot wetter and cooler than it is today, which meant that there were a lot more animals, including things like mastodons, that were roaming through this area. We jump farther ahead, and they actually talk about this area of Hemet where they were actually farming in this region, and the idea from the indigenous people to the European settlers. The many campsites that were out here that archaeologists have found and go back over 9,000 years ago. That's pretty amazing. And the indigenous people here of Diamond Valley are known by the Spanish names the Cujilla and Luiseño. So I'm not sure what the indigenous people called themselves, but those are the two tribes based on the Spanish names for them that lived in this area. And they talk about the different types of minerals and materials the indigenous people used to make arrowheads for hunting. And so some of the real early humans that would have been in this area would have done something very similar. There's some petrified wood. That's pretty cool. Most of these points, or people call them arrowhead, but points, are actually made out of some kind of silica or quartz because it's very sharp, it's very durable, and it flakes in such a way that you can make the sharp edges, and it has what they call conchoidal fracture, which allows for these tips to be very sharp at the end and also along the side. So if you see the little notches on the side of these things, that's from what they call conchoidal fracturing, which is why early indigenous people use these or use silica and quartz to make their points. They end up building a reservoir here, and we're just on the edge of that reservoir, and they found not only a lot of fossils, but a lot of artifacts as well from this region, and that's what they're referring to in these displays. All right, and it says they have an animation that rolls back the mists of time, offering glimpses of life in our valley tens of thousands of years ago. Cool. And here's, as they were digging up and creating the dam here, what was now known as Diamond Valley Lake, they were finding all these fossils. Oh, check this out. This is a nice little movie theater in here. In the round, it feels like you're in a little cave or you're looking off in the distance. All right, the part I'm really excited about is taking a look at some of the fossils that were found here. As they were building this reservoir, they found hundreds of fossils, and we can see right away, we can see a mastodon right off the bat, and we'll take a look at some of those fossils. They also found a bunch of smaller mammal bones down here. Check those out. All right, let's see what we can learn here. So this is actually talking about the work the paleontologists were doing here and how they were finding mastodon tusks and how they jacketed them and protected them to bring them to the center. And not just that, but they actually have notes from paleontologists. And this is from paleontologist Kim Scott. So you can come here and look at the notes. These are all from July of 1997 when they were digging out here and preserving these fossils. Really neat. Oh, and check out the floor. It says this exhibit recreates a dig site where paleontologists recovered more than 60% of little Stevie skeleton, making him the most complete adult mastodon ever discovered in California. Pretty cool. He probably died near a watering hole and was trampled into the mud, where his bones escaped the destructive effects of wind, water, and predators. That hypothesis draws support from the sediment layer around Stevie, a dark clay consistent with wetlands environment dating to about 41,000 years ago. And so it looked like this. So you can see actually a bison here. So bison were really plentiful here in Southern California. You can see some other mastodon, it's maybe rib bones there, and I can see some tusk in here. And then you can see the tools the paleontologists would use, as well as a sketch. As they found the fossils, they would sketch out where they were at so they can document exactly where they came from, what kind of layer they came from, and then do analyses to figure out what kind of environment this creature was living in. And that's how they know it was a wetlands. So as the paleontologists find the fossils of mastodons and all these creatures, the geologists come out and try to figure out the clues to understand what kind of environment they were living in. In this case, you can see they were around, in this case, some kind of pond. It was grasslands. We can actually see some cattails here. There were some pines in the area. And when they studied these, they actually found out there was sagebrush and manzanita, oak, California mountain lilac. They had junipers and cypress, Norway spruce, and ponderosa pine were all in this general area, which of course today you walk outside and it's basically more or less a desert out here. But we were looking at that diorama and looking at the lush scenery. So I wanted to step outside of the museum and show you what it looks like today. And hopefully you can see, although this is a tree-lined highway, most of what's here you'll see is not very lush. It's actually pretty barren on these hills. There are still some grasses here, but definitely not a lot of large natural trees. All the trees here were brought by individuals who moved into the area for the most part. Definitely a stark contrast to what they thought the life was like here in this Valley of the Mastodons over 10,000 years ago. In fact, if I turn around and zoom in on this hill, you really get an idea about what the natural environment looks like here today. Basically a bunch of sage or low, smaller types of brushes and bushes and grasses. And it's not just the big creatures they find when they're looking here, but they look for all kinds of other creatures like rodents, in this case, Valley of the Gophers, lots of gophers there. Talk about nest snails. So they found a number of snail shells, so they get an idea about what kind of creatures are living around the water holes. You can see they have reptiles. They have bones from different reptiles, including from turtles that were out here and different kinds of snakes. And they also had salamanders and amphibian bones that they found when they were coming out here. So by putting all of those together, the megafauna fossils, the geologic layers, the small creatures like the frogs and the salamanders and the gophers, they can really start putting together the story of what life was like out here over 10,000 years ago in Diamond Valley. It's one of the really cool things we get to do as geologists and paleontologists. As I say all the time in my videos, it's always like being Sherlock Holmes or a CSI forensic earth scientist, because we're trying to put together the clues to reconstruct the scene. Could be a death scene for one of these guys up here, or it could just be a scene to generally understand what was happening in that place at a very certain time. It's a pretty cool life. And meet Max, the Pacific mastodon, and up until fairly recently, the largest mastodon ever found, and it was found here in Diamond Valley. Really cool to see this. I've heard about Max. I actually know the individual who named it Max, and I'm real excited to be here in person meeting Max. I know he's sitting above me and he's on a bit of a stage here or stand, but Max is really, really big. Maybe I come to his shoulder. Oh, look at this. There's a whole bunch of other fossils in here, including, I believe, a horse skull in there, and that's really cool. And some vertebrae. And here's Mastodon Max left side ribs. And some of the backbone. And of course, they put some of the bone pieces here. And I was going to put my hand here for scale, but that's a huge knee bone or femur. Wow, gigantic. So this is where his knee would have been, Max's knee. It says they actually found 500 mastodon fossils from 111 sites here. And so this shows the lake, Diamond Valley. So these are the dams to make the reservoir, and you can see all these little dots are where they found mastodons, hence they call this Mastodon Valley. And it was a horse. It's a western horse. Interesting enough, for those who've been following my channel for a while, I always talk about horses and camels and how I'm fascinated by the fact that they both evolved here in the Americas. And of course, for the most part, at least horses are all gone now. Camels still have alpacas and llamas in South America that are relatives, but here in North America, they don't exist anymore. But we can see that old horse skull here, and some more of the bones of the horse, I believe, right through here as well. Check that out. Another This is a mammoth, not a mastodon. I can tell that by the teeth. So the teeth look very different between a mammoth and a mastodon. A mammoth's teeth are kind of flat-ish. The mastodon's teeth have a little bit more, if you will, structure to them or shape to them, or I always want to use topography as a geologist, but they actually have more depth to them. They're not as flat, and that's how you can tell the difference based on the teeth between a mastodon and a mammoth. And they have both sitting here right next to one another, mastodon and the mammoth there. And next to Max, they have a mammoth on this other side. And the one thing that always strikes me is my daughter's really into Greek mythology. And every time I see one of these skulls, I can see how they got the idea of a cyclops, because it looks like which would be their nasal hole here, or their nose hole, if you will, for the trunks to come out. It looks like it would have been an eyeball. And I imagine especially the early Greeks and early humans, if you saw something like this, a fossil like this, you'd think that was a one-eyed creature, and hence we have this idea of cyclops. Always cool to see this. It always reminds me of that story. And this is known as Xena, after apparently the warrior princess. Oh, and here shows them the tooth morphology, and you can see how they're much flatter than what we were seeing with the mastodon teeth that look like this, where you can see it's much more defined and pronounced enamel coming up. So if nothing else you learn on this video today, you now know how to tell the difference between a mastodon and a mammoth tooth. You're welcome. All right, they have stuff on dinosaurs, which is pretty interesting because as we saw in the maps, dinosaurs were not living in this area, but they did live not far away from here in Utah and New Mexico. And these are some fossils from that area. In this case, they're really talking about the late Cretaceous. Talking about all the different environments of deposition, or what we call EODs. And so dinosaurs in the Cretaceous were living along an area that looks a lot like the southern US today, or the eastern US today, maybe somewhere like the Carolinas, or maybe even parts that could look like Louisiana here with this big delta coming out. And dinosaurs were walking around in a very similar environment to those environments we have today. They're showing some hadrosaurs. Those are pretty cool, or duck-billed dinosaur family relatives. This is a new dinosaur for me, and he looks very intense with those eyeballs. It's a Dynamo Terror. It's a new one to me, and it looks like it is not a T-Rex. It is an earlier, smaller cousin that would have lived earlier in the Cretaceous. Pretty cool reconstruction, actually. I could imagine this on some kind of movie set. And they've recreated what the Cretaceous would have looked like. You have some kind of ankylosaur relative here. There's a little turtle down here, would have been around. Series of turtles, look like a soft shell turtle. There's the hadrosaurs, family of hadrosaurs walking through. I guess this would be the Ornithops incanthatus, would be the hadrosaur we're looking at right here. That would have been living during the Cretaceous. Little fossils along the way. So this is from some kind of maybe ankylosaur in here. And if I continue on, and here, of course, is a Dynamo Terror skull. Pretty cool. I didn't know anything about these creatures. And this was actually found in New Mexico in the Menifee Formation. Pretty neat. And here's the other parts of its bones. And because every museum that talks about paleontology has to have it, they have a T-Rex skull up here, which is actually pretty cool. And they have a little bit about other types of features they can look at to understand ancient life. In this case, these are a bunch of different examples of what we call coprolites, or fecal matter from ancient animals, from dinosaurs to ancient megafauna, things like ground sloths. There's ground sloth, coprolite, or dung. Pretty interesting. And mastodon dung. Pretty interesting to be able to study what these ancient animals ate, and that we can still record that, figure out that story. Welcome to the world of coprolites. And check out a giant ground sloth. That's a Harlan's ground sloth. Another one of these megafaunal creatures that lived during the last glacial maxima. Really cool to see. Look at those claws. Oh, and check out its horns and its head. That's a big creature. Looks much bigger than the modern day bison. And it says they ranged the grasslands here. They roamed these valleys up until about 10,000 years ago. There's one here, and then you can actually see a longhorn bison. Look at the size of those horns. Coming from Texas, very familiar with longhorns, but not a longhorn bison. Turns out they actually found multiple types of ground sloth. So this is a Jefferson's ground sloth. This is a Shasta ground sloth. And then of course, back over to the one we just saw, the Harlan's ground sloth. Interesting enough, the most probably prominent carnivores here were actually bears. And they believe they were black bears about 10,000 years ago, but here's a bear skull. And then you also had things like saber-toothed cats, Mastodons, and of course what was known as the American lion that lived here. Pretty amazing museum. All right, with my new best friend here, Max, behind me, I want to thank you all for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. Hit that bell for notification to keep up on all my adventures studying human as well as Earth history and where the two intersect. I really appreciated you all coming with me today. I learned a lot at this museum. It's a little hidden treasure here in Hemet, California. For anybody who makes it out this way, definitely worth coming to visit and learning about both the paleontology and the geology of this region. So with that being said, thanks again everybody for joining me. Take care. I will see you all in the next adventure. Bye for now.